Hi, I'm Kent. I've been slowly working on a two-part mold system for Shapecast. So in the past few videos, you've seen me make these plaster molds using these 3D printed parts. And my first attempt wasn't so successful. I was able to get some pots out of it. However, I wound up with these hairline cracks in the bottom. And I think that was a combination of a couple things. One was the drawing of the pot, and the other was the actual design itself. So I went ahead and redesigned my molds, and I have since gone and slip cast and bisque fired a few pots, and I've had good luck with these. So unlike the others where there was a fracture around the bottom, these are all good. I've got 3 here that all seem to be in good shape. And this one. So that's great. It's good to see that my new mold's working. However, I won't know if these are actually working until they are fully fired, and I want to do that in this video. However, before we do that, I want to talk about a few more things that I've been working on. Well, one of them isn't related to two-part molds. I actually just went ahead and did kind of an overhaul of the geometry for Shapecast, so it can actually handle a lot more different designs. It still has the same fundamental constraints right now of being one-piece molds, and you just draw the outer profile, but it should handle a lot more of the corner cases, and that took me a little bit longer than expected. So working on the videos has gone a little bit slower, but I was waiting for the bisque fire anyway, so that's okay. So what are some of the things that I've been working on the two-part side? Well, in the last video, I realized that I had a bit of a lip on some of my molds, and I said that I thought that might be inherent. I was looking at my 3D printed pieces, and actually I think I just made an error in assembling it. So this gasket here lets us attach the molds together. So this is the inner mold that forms, in this case, the top, and the gasket gets put down, and then there's the other piece that goes together, and the gasket forms a plaster tight seal. I guess I was not paying too much attention, and when I put the gasket down here, I actually put it really close to the outside edge, and that was a mistake. I should have actually kept it much more on the inside. So I think the gasket, even though I screwed this down, wound up getting in the way and actually created a bit of a void here. So that was my mistake, and I should fix that in the future. If you guys are doing that, make sure that the gasket is away from the mating surface. It's really just there as a backup. Hopefully the PLA will seat against itself and keep most of the plaster out, but we definitely don't want this extra material in the way, preventing us to have a nice seal, and in particular getting the 3D printed pieces together so that we can have the form that we want. That's one thing. I was experimenting around with these holes here and the associated pegs, which I have here. These are just 3D printed, and the idea was to be able to better align the top and the bottom. However, I don't think the pegs are doing what I wanted. I tried putting in all 12 and seeing if that helped. It didn't. I tried with a few, and then finally I got rid of them all together, and I just stacked the mold on top of itself, just like that, and felt for alignment, just like I did with my first mold. Actually, we wound up with a rather successful slip cast that way. So here's a pot that I did that way, and at this point it's bone dry. I am still getting a bit of a seam line, but I think that is just because this is a very hard seam. We have this nice gentle curve that is the sphere, and we have this harsh line between the two, so I think there's probably always going to be a bit of a seam in this form. Definitely not starting on the easy side anyways. It'd be easier to hide the seam in a corner or something like that. But regardless, the pins aren't doing what I want. So I think in the next iteration, I'm just going to take them out and not use them. I still want some sort of alignment feature, I think, but maybe just doing it by hand is good enough. We'll see. I went ahead and designed a new funnel. The first funnel I did at 45 degrees, and I printed it this way, and I wound up with a bunch of PLA hanging down. It didn't get supported well, and just grabbed onto the clay, which is really annoying. So I went ahead and redesigned that and made it a little bit steeper angle so that it prints without any supports, and I don't have these funky things. Also made a little bit larger tolerance so that it isn't in there quite as tight. I may have it a little bit too loose, but the other one was getting pretty tight. There's a trick between getting it large enough so that the slip doesn't kind of sneak out the side versus getting it small enough so it goes in and out easily. So I printed this one, and the pot I just showed you used it. So this one's going okay so far. I might still redesign this a little bit more. And then the last change is I went ahead and I sanded the faces of my molds a little bit more. I picked up some other sandpaper. This is 120 grit, and it sanded much better than, I think I had like 300 or 350 before. So I was able to take down the surfaces a little bit more, and now they are nice and flat, and they made together very well. And in doing so, I think I've eliminated basically all of the flash between the two different mold halves. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I basically want to show all these things together and show how they're working. So let's go ahead and slip cast a new pot using all these changes. And of course, the goal with all this experimentation is to find something that I can go ahead and put in a shape cast, and then hopefully you guys can use as well. And I'd rather do that sooner than later. All right, so here's the same mold. And I'm just going to stack it up on top of itself and use my hands to feel alignment. The outer mold isn't perfect, but I think it's good enough. And I can kind of peek down inside and look as well. I think that's pretty good. Let's grab a rubber band here. Make sure things don't slide around. Double check our alignment. Looks good on the inside, feels good. Got my slip mixed up and my funnel. Just gonna go ahead and pour the slip in. So this gives us a nice reservoir, so as the water in the slip gets absorbed by the plaster, the slip level will drop and it won't drop and impact our pot itself. Also then let's use the hole to go ahead and trim the top of the pot. I wasn't sure how to do that at first, but this seems to be working pretty well now. All right, I'll go ahead and let that sit and we'll come back to it when it's time to demold. I went ahead and popped the funnel out and just sponged it off. I do wind up with a little bit of a lip here on the inside that I can just go ahead and trim. So I just use the plaster as a guide. All right, just like that. We can sponge it off a little bit more, so we'll pop off the rubber bands. And then I want to demold this upside down. So I can actually let it set up longer in the top half. And there's very little space between these, I found, now that I've went ahead and sanded it. I think it's free. Here we go. And there is my flash. Or I should say lack of flash. So both half of the molds came out exceedingly clean. And that happened the last time I did this as well. I think I've got a slight, maybe layer shift or separation here. It's very tiny. You can see maybe right there. However, I think at this point we're getting into defects in the original printed molds. I think the plaster itself is performing just great. So since this is soft, I can go ahead and let it hang out here for a little bit longer and let it firm up before I pop it out. So I'll go ahead and do that. However, before I process these anymore, I want to go ahead and make sure the ones I've made already will survive the glaze firing. So off camera, I'm going to go ahead and glaze these. I probably will leave the best one raw just so we can really take a look at it, and then glaze the other two. And I should have a glaze firing coming up in the next couple days, so we will check them out once they're out of that. My glaze firing finished, and here are a handful of the pots. However, that's not what we're here for. We want the spheres, so let me move these out of the way. Actually, I'm going to leave this one out. I'll talk about this one in a second. And here are the finished spheres. These came out really well, except for a glaze incident that I had. This one here, well, needs to say this pot is not going to survive. These two are commercial glazes I've used before, and this one in particular I knew was a bit runny, and it went on a little bit thick. So at least I remember to put a cookie under the bottom, because otherwise my shelf probably wouldn't have survived. But I want to put some crawling because it was too thick, and then obviously it ran down. But that leaves us with these two, and they turned out really, really well. So a primary concern at this point now is the transition between the foot into the pot, because previously it was cracking. And for both of these, happy to say they're a success. And actually that's why I wanted to point out this one as well. I had made this bowl by basically using just the bottom half of the original mold. I wasn't thinking and I forgot I had problems with it, and it went through the bisque okay, but again, I still wind up with a crack here around the foot. So right in there, basically all the way around, there's a crack. So indeed, I think this was a mold problem and a design issue, and I have solved it using the new molds. And in terms of the seam line, I think we are doing pretty well. I can see that it's there. I'm not too sure if anyone else was looking if they would really notice. And on the glazed pot, it basically disappears. There is a bit of a transition, but again, unless you're looking for it, I don't think you know it's there. So the glaze does hide a lot of imperfections. And there were actually a few micro scratches on the surface here from when I was trying to clean it up, and those are all gone. The glaze covered it all up. So overall, I am very happy with these. I think I'm going to go ahead and re-pour the plaster for the sphere at least one more time. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these holes for the alignment pins. They aren't doing what I want, so I can just go ahead and get rid of them. I could potentially go ahead and keep reusing this mold and just ignore them. That's what I did for slip casting these here. However, the other thing I want to do is play around with this face here. I think sanding it's definitely the way to go. I think adding a little bit of extra material that is intentionally sanded away is probably the way to go. This is eating into the form itself, and I'm taking off, I don't know, fractions of a millimeter, so I don't think it's that big a deal in terms of the shape, but I'd rather have the continuity of the original design. I also think I want to put a slight bevel on this surface. Basically, I want the inner side to be mating and the outer side to have a little bit of a gap, so that when we stack these up, there's a little bit of space on the outside and the inside still pressed together. That will let us more easily get something in there to pull it apart. It'll also make the mating face that much smaller, so that there is less to remove and less area for things to potentially go wrong. I think those are on my to-do list, but I'm not too sure at what priority. Now that I have a working mold, I think I want to make some more of these as well. These are just fun. And I have some ideas for playing around with them. One of them I've talked about in previous videos is basically cutting the hole. So here, this is the smallest hole that I can get. It's basically the size of the slip cast hole inside. This one I cut a little bit larger. One of the ideas I want to play with is actually cutting it on the side more, and so we have kind of a side profile. That'll be just playing around with the form once it's been made, and I have another idea kind of in that vein as well. And of course, I want to go ahead and make some additional forms beyond the sphere. That'll let me experiment some more with this two-part mold system. And I think that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.